Hi, my name's Lorna. I'm a developer advocate for Vonage. We're a communications APIs platform. You may also know us by our older name of Nexmo. So this is kind of weird. I'm recording this last week, and with a bit of luck, if everything's going well, you can find another one of me in chat as well if you're watching this talk live. I want to talk today about SDKs, delightful ones, and how OpenAPI can improve this aspect of developer experience, as well as many other aspects of developer experience, because I really care about this stuff. I'm starting from a really major assumption, which is that you already have a description document for your API. You're at a conference all about API descriptions, so I'm hoping that you either have this already or you have it covered and you can come back to this content later. The most important thing to do when you have an API description might be a little counterintuitive. You need to share it. It's not an internal tool. It's part of your developer experience. It's part of what you give, what you offer. Make sure that you publish your API descriptions publicly. Make it easy to tell what changed. We have ours in a public GitHub repo. We have multiple APIs. Each one has their own description document. OpenAPI in the format has a version field. So if we change that spec, whether the API changed or we just madly upgraded the spec, it happens. Then we tag it on GitHub. It actually shows up on our releases page and in a public changelog. Giving developers information is to empower them. It gives them control in a good way, in a really good way. And giving developers control is giving them a gift. We start with documentation, and I think this is both our first and most important developer experience mission. It's also the place that many organizations begin with API descriptions. Making your API descriptions the best that they can be makes for delightful and really useful documentation. I've said many times that if you're not going to publish great documentation, then you don't need to publish the API either, because no one will be able to use it. Once you have your description, that's the content. The presentation for your documentation is a whole separate thing, and you can just try on different styles, like trying on different hats. You can play around with the different presentation options. There's another reason why documentation and publishing your API description can be amazing. For example, I have some accessibility needs. I can't always use your documentation website. But if you give me the API description, I can generate local reference docs in a tool that I know and love, and use the documentation, maybe not with your corporate colors, but in a way that's accessible to me. That's pretty life-changing if you're a person with accessibility needs. One of the most key metrics for developer experience in the API space is time to first API call. Now, of course, you can hack this by just putting a form on the page after registration saying, like, fill in your phone number, we'll send you an SMS. Of course we do this too. It really does build developer confidence. But I think a more important metric is time to first API call with actual developer preferred tools. The API description gives you a bunch of ways in for this, such as importing your API description into Postman or another HTTP client or IDE that supports this standard format. So not time to first API call, but instead time to developer really makes an API call herself. It's an important metric. You can also generate code from an API description. And yeah, this talks about SDKs. You can guess we're going to talk about generated code a bit. Now, generated libraries are better than nothing. I didn't say generated libraries are great or even good. They're not. They look like the code was written by a machine because it was. But if there is no library in a developer's tech stack, then you can, or rather the developer can, use a code generator. And it just gives them a little bit more than just having to read the API reference documentation. Often it will abstract away the HTTP handling, so we won't have to worry too much about the correct header, data type, path, method. That's all done for you. You'll probably get some really basic validation, at least on data type. If you're using an IDE with autocomplete, then you'll get that as well. I like to think of this as self-help for developers by giving them your OpenAPI document for the API. You empower them to work around you, to use whatever integration tools or API tools they already have access to. The generated code by itself can really reduce the cognitive load on your users. Here's an example of the Verify API. This is our 2FA or Step-Up Auth API. Here's an example of it, just the generated code auto-completing in, this is VS Code, but your IDE of choice. I think one of the advantages is it gets people started quickly. They don't have to think too hard or jump backwards and forwards in the docs a lot. It can also cover up a bunch of sins. If you have slightly inconsistent naming of parameters or endpoints, developers are not processing the information as deeply because they don't have to read it off the reference documentation and then type it into their code. They're just auto-completing, so they're not really internalizing it in the same way. So it can help to sort of smooth off those edges. Would you ever publish generated code for your users to use? It's a tricky one. If you don't have the resources to create a real SDK, as we'll talk about in a minute, then I'd be tempted to say don't publish this. Developers who are able to generate their own code from your API description can probably operate it themselves as well. If you don't have the ability to support this kind of thing really well, I'd be tempted not to publish it. It's quite a poor developer experience to be told there's a library, but it doesn't work that well, it's not very nice to use, and we can't really help you with it. I think a good API reference documentation would be a lot better. Some developer communities can generate their own, maintain it themselves, and that's also really cool. The API description enables that. So you came here to learn about SDKs in OpenAPI. I want to show you how to generate code. Now, generated code is going to be a little quick start for a really good SDK, but it's definitely not the whole story. For this example, I've used OpenAPI Generator. There are a bunch of tools in this space, and I strongly advocate that you probably want to go and look what tools there are and try them for your specific, try more than one for your specific combination of technology stack and the actual API description you're working with. I went down this route with this, and for a couple of our APIs, I think a different tool completely might have been better. I'm not really sure if I want the differences in my source code. I'm using Docker here. What that gives me is I don't need to have any local dependencies. It all just happens in Docker. It's got the command line tool in it, and I feed in the options. So first of all, the name of the spec, the name of the API description file that I want to use. I'm setting the package name. So by default, this will be OpenAPI. I have multiple APIs in my SDK, so they need their own package name. In this case, I'm generating for Go. I'm in the middle of creating a Go SDK, and I'm specifying where the files should be written to. The output of this is actually reasonably manageable. So if you know VS Code, you can see that there's this 9+. That's how many syntax or compilation errors there are. This thing does not always create working code first time, but it's an awful lot quicker than writing all of this by myself, and I took out some of the models for this screenshot. You get the API, and if there's different tags in your description document, then you'll get multiple API thing files. These handle the actual HTTP calls in this particular library. You get some client information, some configuration information where you can set things like headers that'll be used on every request. The dependencies are there in the Go files, and then we've got these models. So the models are really valuable, especially in a very strongly typed language. So this example is Go. I feel Java, .NET, you tell me. If you have a strongly typed language, these pre-canned models and the handling to, in this case, JSON and back is really valuable. What I like the most is that if you read the README, it gives you example code. And yes, a developer could use this and use the autocomplete that I already showed you, but we can do better. We've got to this point just using our existing API description document. If you created an API description because you wanted beautiful, delightful, and maintainable documentation, then you got this bit for free. But we can do much better because an SDK is so much more than just a wrapper to some HTTP calls. SDKs are a key ingredient of developer experience, right? Docs are non-negotiable. Don't publish the docs, don't publish the API at all. But a library, an SDK, software development kit, however you want to name it, is such an enabler. We are co-conspirators with developers building things that we would never be able to build ourselves. One thing I love about working on an API is it's just a platform. My mind is regularly blown by the things, even everyday things, that people build that make a big difference in the world based on our API platform. SDKs should be more than just code that wraps the documented endpoints. We're making delightful SDKs. We're making things easy for the developer audience, and this is really important. It's not even terribly OpenAPI specific. There are some key things that we can do to take us from the generated code that I've shown you to a great developer experience. So I'm going to share you some tips. I like to use the generated code as part of my SDKs, but look how that computer generated code is kept well away from the handmade glue layer. This approach keeps the sharp edges away from your users. My top tip here is never modify the computer generated code. I mean, spoiler, you'll need to. These things don't output perfect code for every scenario on the first go. But try not to do anything other than just fix the problems in the computer generated code. Why would you do that? Well, if the API description changes, you can just regenerate and safely know that you're not going to lose anything. So your code should all go here in the handmade section that's between the generated code and the user. Maintenance mode is our reality. We mostly live in maintenance mode. You ship an API and we hope that it lives a long and happy life. So we need to be able to keep on iterating. What I like about the generated code is it does the boring stuff, right? Don't ask me to write wrappers for 20 different API endpoints with all the correct paths, headers, verbs, parameters. I'm gonna screw that up. The machine, however, can do it basically instantly, and then I can move on and look at the interesting parts, the tricky parts, the special cases. By writing wrappers, we keep the users away from the sharp edges and we give them the interface we wish the generated code has. Sometimes it'll be a straight pass-through. Sometimes you'll need to do some messy work inside this layer. And that's okay because we're saving messy work from the developers. For example, this is from just if I'm using the autocomplete or the generated code that autocompletes in my browser, you end up with something that looks like this. You have to really wrangle how the API key gets into the context variable and then pass that in with a couple of other things and some static variables. And half your auth goes in one place and the other half goes in the other place. This is not a delightful experience. It will work. It will autocomplete in my browser. I can achieve it, but I don't have a good feeling. The way that I wrapped this actually looks more like this. Give me your auth creds, use those to make a client, now call this function with just the interesting stuff. You can put more stuff in the options. Everything that's overridable in the API is overridable in the SDK. But we've got the ability there just to keep it simple and to keep it separate. Have a look at that auth create line. We use API key and secret in all our different APIs, and this SDK will support, 10 of them or something. They all start like this: create auth from key and secret. Some of the endpoints like them as part of the post body. Some of them send it as basic auth. Some of them, you get the idea. It doesn't matter to the user, they don't care. Just give me your key and secret. I will do the work to work out which API we're calling, how this is going to work. Let me do that for you. The same with the JWTs. You can pass in a JSON web token, which is what we use for auth on some of our newer applications. Go ahead, give me a JWT, or just give me a couple of ingredients and I'll do that for you. If you don't know how JSON web tokens work, you can just give me the private key and the application ID as your creds, and I'll run with that. Don't make the developer think. I know this is a very mixed technology audience and I really dithered over which was the right language to use. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of different tech stacks because diversity is a good thing. This was from the Go library. And we've got just a little, a little bit more Go before I move on. Providing escape routes. Now, you've seen the helper that I made with the JWT, which is application ID and private key. Or provide this helper that a user can customize, that doesn't hide everything away, that gives them access to the settings that they might need or might need to override for their own use. But you've got to provide an escape route. You've got to provide an HTTP client with all the auth that they can make their own calls on. You've got to provide a way to take the helper functions and customize them. That's pretty important. All right, language diversity. This one's PHP, and it's a security helper. Now, the Vonage APIs are communications APIs, which means that data comes in as well as goes out. So we have quite a lot of webhooks. To do that, you're going to run an open endpoint to the internet. We're going to post data to it. Brilliant. What could possibly go wrong? So what we offer is there's a couple of different APIs that do a couple of different things. But for the incoming webhooks, for example, on the SMS API, we'll send a signature. We generate it on our side, on the Vonage server side, with the shared secret. You have your creds and the shared secret, and you can recalculate that signature and then compare it. What I can't do is enforce that clients do the signature check. If you don't check the signature, your code will work. You'll feel like you've achieved something, you'll probably deploy it to production. What I can do is make the signature check a one-liner. What I can also do is include this correct practice in all of the examples I can get my hands on. This way, I'm making the right thing, the easy thing, right? I'm enabling developers. If you understand what this is about, you'll be happy to see this here. If you don't understand what it's about, I hope that you will blindly copy and paste it, deploy it to production, and I will save you from some terrible malicious incoming webhook attack that you'll never even know existed unless you check your logs really closely. This is our responsibility as SDK providers, is to make the right thing, the easy thing, to do the annoying, tedious work inside the library and just include it as simply as possible for the user to just pick up and include in their own. This is really, really important. I used to have a script that debugged this at every step of the way. You take all the form fields, put them in alphabetical order. Not all languages sort alphabetically the same way with case sensitivity by default, so that's always fun. And then you append a string and I haven't used this script since I added it to the libraries because now people just do it this way, and that's a real good thing. You can also add helper functions that are not directly related. We have these NCCO objects, they're called control objects. This example is Java, just trying to be inclusive. And one of these NCCOs are like nested JSON structures. And they describe all the things that can happen during the call. So maybe we'll have some text-to-speech, maybe we'll ask for some keypad DTMF input, maybe we'll record the call, maybe we will transfer the user to something else depending what key they just pressed, etc. So that all gets sent like this. Deeply nested JSON is quite annoying to build in some languages. If you're a Node.js developer, not a problem. PHP handles it really well. Just throw some sort of array structure at it, brilliant. Not all the languages are like that. And having this kind of builder can massively just, again, smooth out those rough edges. They can just really improve the developer experience. I'm working on a new Go SDK, and I didn't want to build one of these. I really wanted to just ship an alpha version of a new thing and add the bells and whistles later. Just wanted to get something out there, get some early feedback. We've got some customers that can help us. Spoiler, I built a call control object builder because actually in a strongly typed language, it's reasonably difficult to properly test every aspect of this part of the functionality without being able to build these structures. And it was easier just to build the builder than to work around it all the time. I couldn't be sure that everything we could do would be well supported. So it's going to be in the alpha release. That's how valuable the builder functions can be, and it's something you can look for. If you find you include a lot of extra code in all your examples, consider whether that could come into your libraries and add a little bit of delight. It is all about the wrappers. Better developer experience comes from happy developers, just smoothing the way for them. We aid and abet their efforts. We conspire in their success and their achievements, and that's what we want to do. OpenAPI helps hugely by getting all of the boilerplate, the detail, the mechanics, that's all nailed down for us. And then we, the humans, can go look at what delightful would look like, what helpful but not locking you in would look like, and add that as it makes sense for the combination of API and tech stack that we're working in. For added customer delight, always remember that the code is not always the hard part, but more examples are always worth everything. So if you're familiar with the Vonage developer portal, you'll know that we call them code snippets. We have code snippets for everything in multiple languages. So you'll see typically approximately 6 tabs for every possible thing, showing how to install the dependencies, how to do the setup, how to set them up, how to configure everything, and then how to call that endpoint from the SDK code. So that's really, really important. Detailed tutorials that show more than one thing are also incredibly valuable. As developers get more experienced, they become better at foraging in apparently unrelated articles for just the pieces that they need, how to override a particular setting, how to set the language option on this API call. and they will go and pick and peck and pull out the examples that they need. So the more tutorials you have that are non-trivial, maybe making a couple of API calls or comparing a couple of APIs, the better this works out, because it gives more opportunities and more surface area for each developer to find the shiny things that they need for their own project. Don't let's have all the delight on the customer side. For delight on our side, take a look at your dependency manager and see if you can get some download stats or maybe some usage stats. We had an API header, we had a user agent header to the API calls that come from our SDKs. And that helps us to understand which communities are accessing our APIs with our SDKs and how those usage patterns are changing. It helps us understand, oh, we could do more documentation or maybe some more events in this tech stack or this community space, or understanding though this particular community isn't upgrading or always upgrades, or something that's useful to know. I firmly believe that all APIs deserve delightful SDKs, and I'm really grateful that OpenAPI gives us that quick start. It gives us the boring bits and lets us focus on the good pieces. I hope that I've given you some ideas on both how to begin, but also how to polish and how to improve things. I've talked about a bunch of stuff that we're actively using and things that I hope we'll adopt more widely within our own organisation and in the wider industry over time. To wrap up, I'm going to take some questions, so you should start typing those in chat right now. And I would like to share with you just some resources, the OpenAPI spec itself, our developer portal and the libraries that we offer. Also, openapi.tools, which is a great resource for finding tools that work with OpenAPI. So look there for your choice of different documentation presentation tools and also some of the code generators that you might use in your own projects. Finally, I'll leave you with my own contact details. I'm always happy to chat more about this stuff and to hear questions. And I'll just say thanks for your attention.